Good morning, everyone, or maybe it's afternoon already for some of you. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Leslie French, or one of the account managers here at Workamajig. I've been here for the past 8 years already. Hard to believe. Anyway, hope to give you what you're looking for today. The webinar scheduled, if you have forgotten what you're here for, is to cover the ins and outs of purchasing and expenses within Workamajig. This is going to hopefully help you manage your project and overhead costs, and also look at how those interesting items will affect your budget, be able to keep you on track of your budget, and also help you not overlook or forget about any account payables that you have coming on into the system. So this view is good. This review is good for project managers as well as anyone who is also responsible for taking care of those expenses that are occurring on a regular basis within projects. So I hope you're all hearing me. I know it's just after the Thanksgiving holiday. Many of you might have just gotten back from traveling. Hope your day is going well. Let's go ahead and get started today. I've opened up our page here to just go over the outline of what we're going to cover today. And this is found in our training document. It's just an outline of what we typically cover in Workamajig, so that you've got all the best practices and the main things that you need to know about running Workamajig for the purchasing and expenses part of things. We're going to go over each of these areas, purchase orders, and how they reflect into why we encourage your use of purchase orders and how they go forward into the system for other things. There'll be times where you might need employee expense accounts to be filled in. Vendor invoices are certainly a common need for your system to be able to pay for those expenses that you incur during the month and during the days. Credit card charges. If you've not used our credit card charge entry yet, we'll look at how that can be done and why we use that in Workamajig. Many of you have corporate credit cards, and so you may never need those expense reports to be filled in, but we certainly have to use the credit cards, and entry into those charges into the project will be something we can look at today. Also, how to enter miscellaneous costs. So as you see, we're going to go over how to do each of those, the important setups that go along with that. So we're going to use the Q&A board for our questions today. If one of you might be able to enter a "can you hear me okay" comment, let's make sure that's working for you. And I will be asking or break for moments in time for you to post your questions. And thank you. I see that it is working. That always makes me feel better. Thank you, Cindy, that you can hear me and that we all can find that board when we need it. And also, if I don't get to all your questions, we certainly will follow up with you either through those questions. There's a way for us to follow up, or you can send them directly to us at support@workamajig.com. So I'd like to go ahead and get us started today. I'm going to start with just going into the regular board. I'm moving my Q&A thing out of the way now that I've got it open. I'm going to start on the Today Project Manager page, meaning that it is just a nice page that I kind of have put in as my default. But for today's purposes, actually, we want to look at the purchasing bubble, and we will be talking about many areas of the system, but let me go first into the Today Purchasing page. Why is this one different? It's really focused on those who need to really work with all of purchasing. Although your project manager page will be good for most of what you do for project management, the Today page here for purchasing is certainly going to have other areas of the system, including your projects and maybe others that may need to be looked at and addressed. So first of all, let's just talk about the navigation here of what we see. Certainly there's going to be some open items that you may be wanting to look for. And I'm going to address first. Well, first of all, I apologize. I have a lot of things that are just a testing environment, not necessarily as cleaned up as your page might look like. But also you may or may not be seeing everything you need on this page. This is included on any of the Today pages. The step here is to look at your More button. Now, if you're an administrator like I'm logged in as, you will also not only see display options, but you'll see system settings. Display options on this page are very basic. There's not much to do here. Just do you want to see calendars, a specific one, and how do you want it sorted? But otherwise, it's the system settings, your administrators, that can help you get this page to look like you want it. If you do not see this setting, then just make a note. That will be one of those things you may want to address with your administrators that are working in Workamajig for you. Clicking on that, though, as an administrator, so I get to see everything, I can manage what settings the company defaults are for everybody. And I purposefully just, included and excluded a few things that may or may not be seen. In my group, I'm actually the administrator, security group. And I wanted to notice or show you that you can actually modify a page specifically for a certain group or groups. So there's a company setting that may be minor and with a few things that need to be seen and specifically may be directed to your own projects type of details. But I wanted to point out that if you manage it for certain groups, you may want to override those company settings, and then you can always look at who that group of users are and then go in and make those changes. And what I'd like to be able to do is not only maybe make setting changes, but make sure that there are, additional changes. Maybe it's my open items only that I want to see that could have been checked, or something could be unchecked. The idea is what needs to be added for this administrator. And I've already managed to include mine. Oh, and then other things. Are you going to hide the schedule or hide or show things on the board? So there's a variety of things here, but notice we'll talk about each of these areas. I'm going to see invoices. I'm going to see what's waiting to be submitted and approved, etc., and what I need to maybe pay out of stuff. So anything you don't need to show, you certainly can uncheck and then save those changes. So that's what override the settings do for company. You do a company default and then maybe give more or less views for certain groups, depending on which side of the things you need to change. I'm not going to make any changes on mine because I've already reset it to show all. And so we do have quite a busy board here. We're going to talk about many of these things, but what are open items meaning? Well, there may be things that need to be taken care of. Open orders are those purchase orders that we have started and maybe not taken care of yet. They're still ready to be accessed and attached to vendor invoices. Do we have some that have been created that need to be approved? Or there have been some that were created and never submitted. So why do we have these sitting here? You certainly would be able to click in there and go, well, look at those from 2017, obviously something I was testing and never finished out, and you could certainly take care of it and either submit, or in my case, I could go in and take care of it. And since it says 0 and it was from 2017, I most likely can delete and clean up. So if you are an administrator or you use this section and you're able to make those changes, do make some cleanup happen, because the more you have left open will slow down your system. And I refresh this page on purpose just to notice that it should update for you in real time. I'm going to push it occasionally with a refresh. So anyway, let's move on. You're going to see, we're going to talk today about charges. And I've got a bunch in here that I've tested that we're going to talk about how do credit card charges come into the system. And otherwise, we're going to manually add charges into the system and be able to deal with them that way. There's a section for your invoices. Do we have those expense reports that have been approved that need to be invoiced, or some that have been submitted that may need to be approved? So from here, we'll be able to go and look at that and kind of certainly go in and see who's submitted something and either approve it here or open it up and review. Let's move on because I'm going to go into each of those areas separately. And even those payments we're going to be creating in the system. Are we using checks, the old-fashioned handwritten checks that I might need to print? I certainly may have gotten ready to go, but we don't let you forget them by alerting you that, hey, you've printed these. What do you want to do about them? And also on the Today page, as normal as other Today pages, what does a purchasing an AP person or someone looking for those items related to expenses and purchasing need to otherwise find? The open items are great. Things to take care of are great. Views. If you don't already know this, the vocabulary in Workamajig for views is that first entry of reporting. What type of reports do I want to look for? Lists that I want to look for. A vendor list. Well, who are my vendors there? It's right here for us to look for. What orders do I need to look for? What vendor invoices? So all of these would be certainly quick ways to find the report views that you need to look for. And we always have other ways to find views as well as do other things in Workamajig. So another part of navigation, don't forget the universal searching for something. I might be on that purchasing or project manager today page, and I want to go look for vendors. I'm not going to see on my project manager page under views a vendor list. It's left to the purchasing page today, but we will have a global search where we can see views. And then we would need to know, well, if I'm looking for vendors, I know that I'm purchasing something and there's my vendor list. But as you see, that is a full list, especially for an admin. They have views to everything. If you're a project manager coming into things, you probably see the everyone, maybe project management, certainly, maybe or maybe not the purchasing list. So if today you see things you can't on my my demo that you can't see but you need access to, those are things you can reach out to first off to your Workamajig administrator in your company. Who's the main one setting you up, getting you that entry into Workamajig? Let them know what you're thinking you need. They should know how to get in and help you. And if not, together they can send an email with you CC'd on it to us at support@workamajig.com. Can you send that email to us at support@Workamajig if you're not an administrator? Absolutely. We just always suggest that you copy your administrator on the email, because if they need to make the change, then they'll be able to fix it right away versus you going now and telling them what you need them to do. So that's always a good partnership if you want or need our help like that. So moving on then, beyond the views, all these different quick access to report views are the important financial reports that an AP agent may need to look at, like AP aging and their exceptions report, et cetera, et cetera. So again, all of this quite easily at hand versus them going all the way out, going to the everyone, going to the report center. And certainly you can all go there as well, but there's those project financials, the AP and AR reports, other places that you may still need to go, but not necessarily would it be your first page to go to now because you've got your Today page. So I'm going to show all apps now that I'm sitting here in my navigation, and notice that I'm going back into purchasing Today page. Oh, by the way, though, here's a quick search bar for vendors, how to add new vendors. Again, a couple of different places to see the same thing, and all those report views are found in that kind of bubble. Purchasing Today. Okay, any questions at this point? I think we're good. All right, we're going to have to talk about a little bit of setup. So before we get into the fun of using expenses, the important setup, one little bit more look here. I'm going to show all apps. I'm going to move over to the admin manager bubble. Again, you may or may not have that bubble. It is a system backend setting, and we need to talk about a few important things that may be already in place. But if you're new to Workamajig, new to your company using Workamajig, or you're brand new into Workamajig, some of these defaults will be there for you, and it certainly should be customized if you've been in a while as a Workamajig client, customized already to your needs. But why do things work the way they are? This is what we're going to look at for the moment. Under system setup, we're going to first take a quick look at security settings. So if you're not, we talked about how the settings would look on your page, purchasing today page, but it also first comes from this view. Are you, let's just pretend for a moment, we're just a creative person, not just but today's system, you know, we're going to say you're not a purchasing person, you're more of a creative. You can see there'll be some things you can do, but when it comes down to purchasing, which is way down here, there's not a whole lot of view that you would have necessarily by security rights. Now, my defaults will be different than yours. So you may be a creative and you still may have some of these checked. But the point is, if you can't get to what you need, again, check in with your administrator if they're not on this call to help you get them to understand what you don't see, and they can certainly work with you and us if need be for the correct settings. We are going to, though, look at my purchasing agent. Which do I have here? Project manager. We're going to go into my administrator. Definitely, I know I have it set up for this setting. You may have one called just for your purchasing agents, but notice how in purchasing the views here all checked. One thing that I want to point out is if you can't see some things, it may be that you don't have an edit type of option in the system, and I'm going to put in a security right for edit. And you know, what can you do? Can you edit and add purchase orders? Can you approve certain things? That will show up again, whether you can or cannot do some of the things in the system. And the people in the group should be showing up clearly if those people have those rights to do things. So first step is, do you have the security rights? It's a big hunking setup area. We don't expect that you'll know exactly what you need here. Those are good questions to send us to your support email saying this person needs to do such and such, and tell us the person, what security group they're in, and maybe and certainly what they need to do, and we'll help troubleshoot that for you. The other area to do is certainly in the system setup is we need to have certain things set up under purchasing. And so we've got the first line here of purchase items. Now, I didn't show you what we do with items yet, but we need to have what we're purchasing, what we have expenses for in the system. The system is a logical system. Are we talking about that we need to add in some printing expenses? And so we have that labeled in here, and what expense account is going to default to for you already set. What sales account you might be billing it towards, even a billing item, how it might be summarized. If I click on billing item, you'll notice some of my expense items might be an outsourced type of an item, production type of an item, services potentially. Your views will differ depending on what your purchasing agent may have already set up for you. If you don't know quite what it means, certainly we'll follow up with you again on that. So purchase items do need to be in the system. And if you've been in a while, you probably have 100 of them, because it's kind of like needs to be a unique item for whatever purpose, then you'll have that in the system. Also, if you are going to do expense reports, you are going to need a list for expense report items. It does have its own list. We don't have a very long one to start off with, but certainly you can insert rows on both of these lists to include more items. But let's just take a look at these items. For example, like you might have air expense, car rental, hotel expenses, mileage, all the important mileage reimbursement. We know how much we you need that today. I wanted to spin this line open. Notice that little spinner will open up for you if you need more detail. Can certainly put a standard description, but the unit cost, or the unit rate, I should say, is what is important with the expense report for mileage reimbursement. And is it at 55 cents now, or is it going up to $59 a mile? I know it's expensive for gas, so these usually are updated yearly. But then your users that are filling in expense reports can say, hey, I've driven 17.3 miles, and they don't have to worry about what that calculates to because you've got that set up in your items. There also may be a need for some markup. I forgot to point that out on the other items list. We'll go back to that in a moment. But so make sure you've got the expense list of items here as your group is starting to use expense reports. Going back to quickly though to purchase items, don't know if you guys do markups. Some of you do, some of you don't. And if it's like an always type of thing, if we're hiring talent, for example, if we bill it to my client, do we do a markup on this item every single time? Or more times than not, you may want to put that markup right here at the item level, because then whenever you end up using that on a vendor invoice, enter it on for billing purpose for the client for going forward, that markup would just always show up. Now, can you remove it at the time of use? Absolutely. A purchase item default setting is meant for what's the normal type of way we use it. Is there a markup that's normally needed? Then put it here at the item level. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. So that is how we set up the basics of what we need to use in purchasing in the purchase items. The last thing in there, I should point out one more thing. I'm sorry about that. Do we ever charge tax? Is there anyone in the group that does charge tax? If so, I may talk more about it, but otherwise it's just really a note here to mention that if an item that you purchase, you have to pass on taxes for to your client, you might want to mark that tax 1 applies, maybe even in some cases tax 2. Tax 1 might be that federal tax or state tax, I'm sorry, and maybe county tax. Nobody in this group is marking that they worry about taxing, and that's typical. It's not typically done, but it sometimes can be something you have to do. Either at the item level, or it could be at the client level. Maybe you have a certain client that needs to be, they're outside of your area, you've got to charge them tax. That might be a need that you need to do. So that's where you could set it up, needed potentially maybe more at the client level. We'll just talk about it today, won't go into that setup, but it's really more of a client setup at that point. Okay, so I think we'll move on at that point. One thing to look at here is your GL settings, that the important settings that have already been probably set up here for you, and it's probably hopefully standard with your group, is, are we going to use those items we just looked at? So we show them when we enter expenses. They're so important to help us with our accounting that we're requiring those items when you enter in an expense. And by the way, because we've already set up what expense account those items will be posted toward, we're going to make the system work for us instead of us working the system, and let the default expense account come in at the same time. So those are really solid standard settings for the expense items in your GL tracking area. We're going to look at the GL tracking area one more, not tracking, but the GL accounts. We're going to always, you've got those already set up, and we are going to look at this momentarily, so I don't have to come back in here. But notice when we talk about credit cards, we do need to have a credit card already in the system, and it does need to be in the GL accounts. If you don't already have them in here and you go, well, we do use business credit cards, might be a good time to reach out to your account manager and go, Leslie talked about this in the webinar. How can you help us set this up so it's done correctly? It's not so hard to set it up here, but there are some more things that we'll talk about that you may be wanting to also do with credit cards. Not only just enter in the expenses, but maybe download them into the system from our Plaid setup. So as a quick lookup, you've got your you've got to have a vendor account in as a credit card, and you need to be able to tap it in here and talk about how you're going to use this. And then who is the approved users, not only the one holding the credit card in their hand and the thing that we love to do, spend money on those credit cards, but also who could use it in the system to enter in those expenses. And that's what we mean by card users. It's also not only the person that may be charging on it, but who's going to enter any details into the system on it. That was the basics there, and any number of credit cards can be used. And then of course there's some other settings around that, but that's the basics when it comes to the GL account. Due to time, I'm going to move on. Any questions on the transaction setup area, or I should say the GL settings or expense purchasing area? All right. Let's think about where I need to go next. Oh, the important transaction preferences, almost moved off. One more thing, back in still this system setup. The first page we get to when we get to Admin Manager System Setup is our System Options page, and we want to look at transaction preferences and notice that there'll be some defaults of what we need to do within each of the areas we're going to touch today. Just notice that there's going to be a default of setups and next number on expense reports. Our purchase orders have some default settings. If you need a type, what kind of type are you using? Are you going to do default standard headers or footers, etc.? So take a look at this area. There's not a whole lot that I use in here on this setup other than those basic pieces that I'm showing you here. Client invoices, we're going to not talk about. We're going to talk about vendor invoices. Here we go. And notice that you can set up your default approver. Maybe it's a person entered below that's that approver. Is it going to be maybe because your project managers could actually create those purchase orders? We're going to show you why they might be doing that today in a few moments. Otherwise, person entered below works real swiftly for some people because maybe that project manager can set up a purchase order, but you don't want them approving it. You want to look it over first. And that certainly then could be that person entered below. And who is that person? And other, send vendor invoice approver notifications, if that makes sense, and default posting default date based on invoice date. Whatever you guys need would be what you'd set here. What's your transaction preferences for vendor invoices? Are they going to be a term of 30 days? Whatever you might need to set here, or you can actually preset that at the vendor level, and we are going to look at that next. So no saves for me today because I've got mine set up. So that is our transaction preferences. We're going to talk about now that vendor setup, and then we're ready to roll with the fun stuff of really using the system. But to use it well, we want that good setup. So that's why it was the start of our call today. Now, remember, I did go into purchasing and I could find vendors right here. I'm also going to find vendor records, believe it or not, in a back. It's kind of really the front door of under salesperson, because all vendor records, all client records are all company records. And I love this view for this purpose because I can go to strictly a client view, and I can go to a vendor listing. Now, I could have done it in the other window, but this is coming in from a company viewpoint of those records marked as a vendor. And it works nice in that we've got all set up that we can address in here and do some nice quick updates that we can't do necessarily in our vendor listing. Don't ask me why, because it will be too hard to explain the why. Just know that if you can't do a mass update, you might be in just a regular vendor report instead of the company report. And notice that then if I needed to, I had 2 or 3 or more updates, I could do some changes here. So just know that I like this view for that reason. If I go in, and I'm actually going to go look for my Kinko record, because I wanted to use that in part of our lookup today. Kinko's, do a search. You could find it whichever which way. Notice it says company info. I do also have that vendor detail down here. And in this case, since I'm coming in from this record, now I do want that vendor detail. I'm going to go into it. So depending on how you get there, you may find vendor details at the top. Or if you got company detail at the top, then go and find it at the bottom. Anyway, under vendor, you'll notice what already things might be connected. And I've worked with this group for a while. I may have certain contacts listed. I certainly have already current purchase orders. Did you know this is a quick reporting view? Oh, what have we done with Kinko's? I don't want to go search for it in a long report. Here's exactly what I already show here. And I can run a report view right from here. And I can't print it from here, so depending on what you need. But if it's just look up and find, there's a quick way to do it. But we're here to talk about that purchasing default setup. And we mentioned that you could do a system-wide default for terms, but in a Kinko or a direct vendor record, your payment options can be set here at this point and go in, certain things. We're going to talk about, does this vendor accept credit card payments? If so, check the box, accepts credit cards. Maybe anyone would do, but maybe you've got a specific credit card that you've already used for this client or this vendor, and you want to always pay your vendor through your Amex card. So you can choose whatever credit cards you might need there. Email credit card info too, if you need to send specific info. Otherwise, what type of other payment method would you use? Payment account type, checking if there's a routing. So what I've done here, I've enabled ACH for this vendor. I could pay them in a number of ways. So I get to show that off when we get into payments. You do need to, if you have a vendor that would rather you pay them through ACH instead of sending them that manual payment. Who has checks these days? I know I have one or two people I have to mail a check to. It slows me down every time. I love my ACH payment. Even if I just set it up as an auto pay in my bank, I'm not doing a formal ACH batch to my bank. I'm just setting up payments at my bank level because I'm in control that way, and it's me personally doing this. But if you're a company, you might actually have an ACH batch you want to send them. This is what you would have to do as one of the setups that we can talk more about in detail another day. But as you see, Kinko's may accept that ACH, so I have to not only check the box, but then do the basics. We do truncate. My bank account number is showing here. I think that is something, again, secure. It's not a real bank account, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? But it would be something that if I have the rights to see a vendor record, you might be aware of. Can they see the payment options? You can lock these areas down from the general user in Workamajig. Again, I'm an admin, but if you do want to ACH enabled, it does need to have some sort of detail here so the system can work with it. Okay, so we know we're going to show that how that would work in our system. So that's where it came from. Oh, and one other piece of setup that I think we need to talk about. Oh, I forgot to point out, you can set up that your vendor does take a markup directly. I already showed up in that same areas where they accept the credit cards, and their terms could be updated in that vendor listing. Moving on, one last little bit of detail is your employee setup. Okay. Now mine are just makeup people, so don't worry about who's here, although we've got a colorful group of users, as you can see. But your employees, each of them may or may not have a PO limit. What do we mean by that? Well, I talked about that individual that may need to not only necessarily create the purchase order, but can they approve a purchase order? And as you see, there may be certain different levels of approving that we could do. You might have a regular project manager that would say, you know what, if your purchase order is below 500, it's just needed, and go ahead and approve it. They could have a $500 limit. Or just none at all. So any number of purchase order approvers is up to how many levels you need that to be. Could it be just one user? That's totally fine. Give them the high level so that nothing gets lost in the system. We don't want that $1 million purchase order out there to be lost because nobody could approve it. All right, so that the level that it does need to be inside of the employee record. Also, you might need that credit card approver, and I have Alice listed on mine for some reason. And in case I need to show it, I am going to show you where it would set up in the accounting and my credit card approver. Of course, I have all power, so I'm going to put it back to me. But it could be I've got other approvals, but when it comes to credit card entry, maybe it does need to go to a certain approver. Just like our expense report, also in this same accounting setup. Don't you love my hourly rate? All makeup, please. Makeup believe here. My expense report approver is also listed here. Can I approve my own expense report? Yeah, maybe so. I put it together. I know what I needed to submit, and there it is, and I'm approving it because the next step would be then we create that invoice. But most often, most users are sending that expense report to their supervisor or their owner of the company. And same thing with the time approver. All of that lives here together. And one more little piece, if I am going to have an expense report to submit, that's because I need reimbursement, right? I need to be paid through the company for that reimbursement. Now, Workamajig needs to know that we've paid that expense. So we need that approver, and we also need that person, me in this case, to have a vendor record so that we can pay them as a vendor. You say, they're not a vendor. Well, no, but the system needs to see that employee as a vendor temporarily so that we can at least mark that we've paid that individual, even if it's through payroll. We'll show you those steps. The vendor record, if it's blank, you certainly may have already created them one, go look for it. Otherwise, create it right here by, you will see create vendor record right in their record if you've never used this before. Mine has already been created, so if I click here, I'll see a quick report on my vendor record and any things that have already been created for me. I don't know why I called it a central hub, but there you go. My expense reports, my timesheets, all of that in there. Okay, so if they don't already have a vendor record, you'll have that quick access to create it from here. All right, let's move on. All pieces need to be in place for me to show you what's going to happen next. Any questions? I do see some have come in. Let me take a minute to look. No, I'm looking at the wrong alert. All right, no more new questions. So thank you. If you come across something as we go, enter it and I'll come back to the Q&A as we get there. So we talked about how to set up the vendor records, how to get that employee record set up properly. Let us go now back to my whatever page we want to get to. I'm going to go back to my purchasing today though, to show that again on this page, those shortcuts, all things that I need to deal with. One of the other shortcuts is the plus. Same thing as this plus, but just like we showed in the views, when I click the plus up here by my name, it's like, what do you want to create new? And it may be anything in the whole system. So it's a long list, especially if you're an admin. If you're in a accounts payable or whatever, receivable, you may just want to have this as your page because your plus here is specific to, oh, I'm creating a new vendor. I might need to do a new purchase order. In fact, we're going to talk about purchase orders today. So if I do create a new purchase order from here, well, you'll notice that it has a request for that vendor record. I have GL company set up. You may not even see that, but if so, that's required. You may be filling in type and what is that item that's required, certainly that purchase item. And so you certainly would be filling in the dots, even going down into, what project it's going to possibly go to. It's a very full screen. We can finish it out, but as you see, click, click, click before I can add more orders here. That may be your job and this would be your place to go to it. Just know that you would need these details. Who is the vendor? I don't know why that doesn't show up as a requirement, because it surely should be, and you certainly would fill in, what is the vendor's name and so forth and so on. And what else is that project? And I'm not going to fill this in. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. That is certainly a very usable screen. Purchase order, save, prove it, or send it for approval. We'll see it in another screen though, so I want to move on. We can also create a vendor invoice also from here, but we're going to show a different way that this vendor invoice, well, actually, we're going to create a vendor invoice shortly, but we'll come back to that. So notice anything with purchasing involvement, even a credit card charge. If you click here and it gives you an error, it's because you don't have that credit card set up that we looked at in the GL settings. So what credit card has been used? You know, certainly any that have been in here ready to roll, you can pick the name of that credit card and the details of when it was charged, the required item. I'm going to go ahead and save this one, and certainly might have been some supplies. And it goes in with the defaults that we already don't really maybe know, but the system's already set up giving it to me. And then basically I might just have a project I want to code it to. And so I'm going to go ahead and pick one that I have in the system for Bear. Bear County 2. We're going to look at that one today. And even I can choose a task. So this is just a manual method of saying, hey, I bought some supplies for our meeting and the cost of that was, you know, 50 bucks, whatever. Now, if you do this much and you should see the description came in, you hit save. Do I need an attachment or not? And you'll see that I can go ahead and continue to add in more. Here is my last charge though, in case I need to go look at it, which I wanted to show you. Basically, it is what it is. And the nice thing about credit card charges is that they're automatically approved because when I'm the one who entered it, maybe it went to someone else to approve it. But if you've got the charge, you've already charged it. It is a done deal. So we don't necessarily worry about an extra layer of charge approvers in the system. And they also can automatically get posted. So just be aware of that. If you're uncomfortable with any of these steps, we'll review that with you again as a separate call with your administrator or your account manager. But that's a manual method. Now I went in from today purchasing, certainly today here or up here on the plus, going to purchasing. And once again, 2 ways at least to get into some areas. That would be the same view. All right, we're also going to talk more about them coming in on a manual, or I mean on a downloadable basis, but we're going to move on at the moment. Let's create that purchase order I mentioned a moment ago. I'm going to use my shortcut because of time. I love my recents, and I'm going to go in and find the project I just did a quick entry for right here, and notice that we will already start to see transactions hitting the project, approved or not, and we see that labor's been added, and there's that credit card entry I just did. Now this may or may not have had any approved budget to it, but it certainly is a cost on the project. We want to see that cost. We may be wanting to bill for that cost. So we're going to come and look at transactions every now and then. We're also going to talk though about the estimates, because going back to purchase order, this is where it all starts. If I have a project, I've already been decided with my client what we're going to need to do. And maybe we've already built in the schedule and the expected labor, and I already pulled from schedule. And we see that we've got different hours on each task kind of accounted for. And I can even show or hide those zeros, and we can see each line. I hate it when my mouse does that, has its own little value of labor. And that is certainly one part of the estimate. Second part is, do we have any of those gross expenses? Now quickly, we're going to add in a line. Why do we need expenses? Well, if we're going to have known expenses and we need to bill my client, we better be sure that that client's willing to pay for those expected expenses that we can already estimate for. And so when we create that expense breakout, it's going to request that item. So again, our item list we saw earlier, and is it those supplies that I just purchased? I should have done this first, right? But maybe it's already here and we already do. We know we have supplies for the beginning meeting. We may or may not have a vendor figured out, but I'm just going to pick a vendor real quickly and notice that, it could be whatever vendor is on our system that we need to already have there for me to pick. In an estimate, I may not have it ready. And that's fine because, by the way, if we're not ready to finalize this estimate, I can create a quote. I think you might have saw on my Today page, I had some created quotes that need approving. Why do we do create a quote? Well, in this case, I need to save first. I'm jumping the gun because I wouldn't quote on supplies. So let me just move on. And in fact, I didn't even get an expense because I was looking at quote. And I know my basic supplies were always going to be 50. Let's move on to the next line because I want to show you the great quote. Now, again, what is the item? It might be for printing, it might be for other things, but if we know we're doing a big printing job, I might need to certainly get that quote. I don't know the vendor. I may like to show it on a task just so we know when that expense might be happening, and certainly grab it if you don't have it required. It's a choice. Otherwise, some systems already have the red dot there. For that reason, we like to show where that expense happens in the system. What is the description? What are we doing here? What do we think the cost is? Well, if we don't know, we certainly could create that quote. So remember, I had to save it first. So get that green flash. And then I may say, you know what, I'm going to check with a couple printers. This takes a whole training on itself, or at least a partial training. I won't go into any more other than to say, if you do quotes now, and you probably fax them a quote of what you need or the details, you might be doing it through email with a PDF, etc. You don't have to change that method, but if you want those approvals or those discussions to come directly into Workamajig, you can do a quote request and send it to any number of vendors. And you would add the number of vendors you want to send it to. And they might need to just know to look for that email, and they can update their quote directly in that email, which would directly come back to your estimate. And by the way, when you do it that way, you might see 3, 5, 10, whatever number of quotes you need to get. And once you approve the one you want to go with, it will update your estimate. So I'm not sending one today, but that is the quick gist of a quote. And we do that when it's an unapproved estimate because we don't know yet, but we're going to assume we know. And I'm going to, go with my Kinko's favorite little vendor there. And they've already told me what we might incur. I need 500 items, and they said it might be $2 a pop. And what does that amount to? Is there that markup? Maybe, certainly Kinko's isn't charging me a markup, but I might be charging my client a markup. 10 is 10%. Okay, so there you go. If we are ready to roll, we can certainly send this out to our client with the print, and certainly then we would approve it if they've come back and said, yep, love it, let's go with it. We need to approve the estimate if we want to budget on our project. Trust me, if I went back now to show you budget, it would just show you zeros. We have a budget, is an approved budget. Once it's approved by your client, you certainly want to approve it here. When we do so, I keep saying we're going to create a purchase order. We are ready to do so. I might be that project manager who just got that go-ahead from my client for these expenses, and Kinko certainly may not even need a purchase order, but I want to have a purchase order. Let me show you real quickly why. I'm going to go back to my project. Remember the transactions? We have expenses we've already incurred. The known labor is here. Our credit card expense we got in there quick and easy. But what about all of the rest of those? What about that vendor that we just approved a quote with? He may be sending us a invoice, but it may be 30, 60, maybe not even for 90 days yet. I've already promised that expense on this project. I want to see it already coming through on my budget, which I will show you one real quick view of it. It does take a moment, but that budget is not only the approved amount we should be keeping within so that we make money on the project, but also, what are expected expenses. And this is always slow on the first come in. Here we go. There's different ways to look at a budget, but by item, we're already seeing what's been approved and what our current spend has been against that budget. We always see it here, and by the way, you can customize this really nicely as well as you need it, again, by security group or by a company default. And it's a very robust area to modify because we could see it by type, by task, by person. Each of those may have a different report of columns. So it's probably already preset for you. You may need more details. So do know why. One, I need that approved budget, and I need those expenses that we know about. So in our estimate, we've approved it. We're going to go right quickly back to the expense and go into my printing. And yep, Kinko's is not going to send me a bill right away, but I now, instead of create quote, I see a create a purchase order. I can go back to the quote if I need to, but we don't need that. That's not showing on my budget. What is showing is would be the purchase order. Remember, I had to click when I went from new, and I had to click into who was the vendor, what was the project, blah, 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 blah. This was create purchase order, and it's done. Now, it's not approved yet, but I can see the line. I see the amount. I might even see the gross or markup. Yep, I do. Everything's here. Do I need to add more? Maybe, maybe not. Certainly, you can see I could even attach the required spec sheets that they're given to know what the printing will look like, etc. Who do I need to notify? Who's the approver? If I'm not the right approver, if it was a higher amount than my approval level, Alice would have been given this to approve, or I can send it to her now. Say, I'm busy. I don't think I want to approve it. I can send it to her. Otherwise, I can certainly approve it. If I printed this purchase order right now, it's not approved yet. You'll see it's a draft. Do you need to send it to maybe your vendor like this? Let them approve it. Yep, that's what we said. That's what we promised you, blah, blah, blah. Of course, it's really, what is your workflow? But once it's approved, do you even need the printed copy? Maybe not, but if you were to print it now, it's one of your standard reports, nothing to customize. If I had a logo, it would show here in my system. There you go, the draft is removed. So again, the real purpose of that purchase order in my world, in maybe your system, your setup as well, is once it's approved, that approved estimate can give you a quick purchase order. Approved purchase orders will now show in that transactions. Come on, baby, open up. Here we go, all transactions. Here we go, here's my order. So all things are hitting my project. More time entries will come along as they do, and we know we've already promised and burned at least $17.25 of my approved budget. We can also find any of those purchase orders in the project view itself. So I'm back in the project dashboard. Purchase orders could be easily found here. Any number of them might be here. I can go back and look at it, take care of what I might need to do, etc. Create new one right there. I noticed that's another little plus, and I'm in purchase orders. Now this one's manual, and what am I doing? But it is already programmed to go to this project from this view. Okay, another place, where would I find other purchase orders? Member views on your Today page. You've got your purchase orders here for, where are they? Orders. I always think of the word purchase here, but it's under orders, purchase orders. I don't know why they don't call it that, but it is by default purchase orders. And I could search for a specific project or just hit search to get all the purchase orders in the system. And as you see, what's their status? Are they closed? Are they still open? Are they sent for approval? All of that could be showing right here. What do I have to approve? And I can also find them in my report view. Okay, I need to take a moment to see if there's anything else. So tracking and reporting views. So I'm finding that we got that and I don't see any more questions. So we're going to move on to that vendor invoice part of the call today. So we're talking about how do we get project expenses. So I keep going back to my project to kind of give that as our reference. By the way, our project board will also keep track of things if indeed you see or have been enabled to see, of the project snapshot and maybe that profitability. You may or may not see this view. It is specific to project managers to see it potentially, and or your level. Do you get to see the project profitability? So if you don't see this view, it could be you just have to click it open. But notice at a glance, the snapshot will show you what you've been burning, what the amounts have been used on here, budget from estimate, the actuals coming in. Have we done any billing? I love this little options. We can even look at maybe some options like overhead and other ways to look at this info. And then there's the project profitability. Now I like snapshot for most users, but profitability I find sometimes is limited to those admin or those high level users, because you've got your approved estimate here. You might be able to see that work in progress on this view. You certainly will see actuals and write-offs. So this is more of a profitability report that may not be for everyone's eyes. So we want you to have always to keep track of things. Vendor invoices will be something that certainly can be done. And we notice here. Yeah, let's go to the vendor invoice. So we did a purchase order to that vendor, Kinko's, and let's move ahead in time and say that Kinko's has now sent us that invoice. So let's, by the way, while I'm looking for this, I'll have a story. One of my first new clients that gave me feedback about, they were watching their budget. They felt so good. They were on schedule. Everything was looking great. And somehow they missed a deadline for mailing and they had to overnight something. Wasn't on their budget to spend $100 in shipping, whatever it costs them. I have no idea. She said normally it would have crushed their budget. And she would have been worrying about it maybe for 30 days till they got the invoice, but they had already had in that vendor invoice, purchase order in the system, and that made them, they entered their extra expense and they were just dizzy with excitement because they could see right away they were still under budget. Doesn't happen often, but I mean, purchasing, I'm going to do that vendor invoice real quick. I could have gone into this plus, couldn't I? Add that vendor invoice. Now the quick shortcut here is if you already have the purchase order in the system, you just, first of all, you have to have the vendor. But and their invoice number is what they sent you. So it's this test for today's webinar. But what was the order number? I know some purchase agents who already know numbers by heart. It's amazing me. But you know what? I don't know if we have a vendor. I may be that AP person. I don't know if Kinko's has a purchase order. But if Kinko's does have a purchase order, look at there. We will see it. And we will see if one's open amounts or not, who the vendor is. If I'm not even sure if it's the right purchase order, I've learned that you can even put in the project number. Helps to start to type better. They're 02, and I know it's for this project, and then I would know specifically, I have 2 vendor invoices, look at that. And I can go in with the latest one because that was today's, but you'll see that you'll have some ways to find different ways for the purchase orders that are already in the system. Did you notice how this window changed as soon as I grabbed that order number? It took away a bunch of other detail I would have had to fill in for that vendor invoice. That's why I love to show it in this order. Purchase orders are holding your budget, know that it's spent. Vendor invoice comes in, we got to pay that vendor. And if you have an order, whoever's filling in this invoice just goes to find that order. It may not be a perfect match, but it's the order for this vendor, for this date, for this project. And we're going to go ahead and hit save. Now, if I want to add more, I can, but I'm just going to hit save so we see the next steps. And now what it's asking for is are there other purchase orders for this vendor that may apply to the invoice that you've got in hand? But otherwise, you certainly only got the one. I can just select all to grab any and all that might be there. We're just saying, yep, that's the purchase order. Do I need to change over the unit cost or an open amount? You might have to. You may say, no, that's all fine, but they send me, they billed me for shipping because I was going to pick it up and they had to ship it to me. Well, we don't do that change here. We'll grab that in the next step. So, yep, it's for this purchase order. And what we have done is we've stapled that purchase order to this new vendor invoice. If you think of that back in paper days, and here's where I could add that additional line if I did have shipping to include on this, but otherwise it is certainly that vendor invoice. And I always forget to point something out. Let me go back to that purchase order. If we've attached it, if it's the whole thing, it has already closed the line for us on this purchase order. If there was leftover amounts, it would have maybe left open the purchase order. So do you need to decide, is this purchase, I'm sorry, yeah, this purchase order, is it still open? Is it closed? It did it for me automatically. If there's an open amount because they overbid you and they charged you, said 1,000 and they only charged you 900, it may be asking for, you know, is this the last invoice? Or are you expecting another invoice to come in? So before you grab that invoice, do notice you have some options there. For time, I'm going to move on because the whole point is we have this vendor invoice. We've applied the purchase order to it, and it may be perfect in the way it is, and I just need to approve it or submit it for approval. And we'll do that. Let's look, and I know we're at the top of the hour. I hope you can hang in there with me, because for a brief little bit, we have a few minutes here to show you that the project now has kept evolving. Our budget's going to keep showing what is going on, and you'll see our order has now turned to a voucher that's been approved, same amount. Our budget's still intact. Credit card charge is all showing up there. Everything is tracking, and things are going to be billable when we're ready for billing. One nice thing about a purchase order, you could have pre-billed the order. Some people do that because they don't want to hold the money and spend it to the vendor before the client has paid them. So you would see probably a pre-bill option. Otherwise, anything that's approved is still ready for billing. All right, ladies, I know, and gentlemen, we are ready to finish, but we have a few moments if you can hang in there with me to cover some easy peasy areas. Quick expense entry, miscellaneous costs. This is an automatic approved cost. It's already actually an overhead cost that might have been by buying iStock photography or whatever. Again, do you want to include that cost or not? What is it that the item is that you let me get that in there, iStock or photography or whatever you have called as the item, and how much was that net? Maybe we've paid about $10 for these different images. Is there a markup or not? Miscellaneous costs go into, hit the budget. It may have been overhead costs that now you're applying toward this project. It's a purchase that was done months ago that you guys have as an internal bucket to pull from. So that's as easy as a miscellaneous cost can go in. It will already be approved and showing up as your transaction in the system. Also in here is an easy cost is that expense report we mentioned. And quickly going in, I, as the individual, had some cash out. Maybe it's just mileage. Everyone will have, if they go to their plus up there by their name, that quick plus entry. They may not be on purchasing today. They're just on creative today or whatever. Everyone bubble has where they can enter in their own expense report. You click there, it's ready for you to go. You're going add a new expense report. What was the date? Certainly wasn't today. Maybe it was last week or two. Now this is where you would pick the project that expense was for. I was traveling for my project Bear Country and I'm grabbing it. Do I know the task? If it's required, you certainly need to you know, I'm going to go deliver to the client, whatever your reasoning of this expense, what task could have happened? What is the item? Certainly, I want to show that mileage possibility. Certainly what was it? I traveled about 50 miles and 0.3 because I'm watching my meter that closely and it can calculate that gross for them. Certainly what other expenses certainly could be even other projects. Notice they may have several things that they're working on. I'm just going to keep going on to my project 02 for bear country, and I should have done bear. That would have been faster. There it is, bear 02 and and keep rolling. And this one is just certainly maybe some supplies or whatever they had expense wise. The other item here, I'm going to just put in a gross amount. It was a $10.66 item, et cetera, and your dates and all that are appropriate. Now, each line, as you notice, has the option of saying, I've got a paper receipt. Let me go back up here. And if you get a red, that means, hey, you didn't fill everything in. Didn't need it, need to just go in, go, yeah, I've got a paper receipt. And in fact, I'm going to attach it. If you're requiring attachments, go out to wherever your attachments might. I know I put one on my desktop and add that receipt. Certainly you would see it here if it's uploading. If they cannot upload its file system rights, it'll go into their security rights, but that way then you would be alerted, hey, there's a receipt, and that would be good for that IRS report potentially. Okay. I forgot to do something, and that's a good thing because I want to show you everyone and expense reports. Here's a new button again, but I want to go with what I've already filled in. And if you forget to submit it or you didn't finish it, you can come back here, unsubmit it. There's several I should be submitting. Look for the date you need to go back and modify. Here's today's. I think that's today's. Whatever, what is my wrong? Today's, yeah, oh, 11/27, yep, different dates. So whatever one it is, certainly go in. And if you have the approval ability, you certainly can approve it. I want to go back to, it must be this one. I know what's throwing me is the date. It showed me the date that I chose. And notice my new line defaulted to the first date that I picked. So make sure you're picking the right dates. That one's fine for me. I'm going to now approve it because I have all powers. They would submit it for approval. As the approver, by the way, you get the quick shortcut of creating a vendor invoice for that user. Now, if it was me approving my own, but I can't create vendor invoices, I wouldn't see this button. So don't get misled. This is because I'm a super user in here. And I created that vendor invoice because I'm going to pay this employee directly. And it may be an actual check I kind of, or auto deposit that I send to their bank, whatever way you do this. Now notice that you have this more, if you need to unapprove it and make changes, you certainly can post it. What is the system you need to do for here, but I'm going to leave this actually unapproved for the moment and pop back to my today page. So that's how the individual can find their current submitted expense reports. This review, that page is really just your unsubmitted page because anything I might need to see that has already been approved, I can find under views, under expense reports, and my refers to me individually, not everybody's. And my expense reports would be found here, and I can keep track of what's been paid. And by the way, you might need to modify that, and has it been paid or not. So you could work on modifying that report view. Lastly, going back to our today page, purchasing today. I am sorry, we're 10 minutes or 7 minutes over. We're almost done here. Notice those different things that are open here. Again, do you need to go in and approve some items? Here are some that need to maybe be deleted, or hey, why did you not submit this for approval kind of follow-ups? Here's those incoming charges, which we haven't shown you yet from the imports. Invoices waiting for approval. I know that there's this area for, expense reports to invoice and waiting to approve. That's that expense report I just unapproved, the one from today. It could be sitting here. Maybe my step is to submit. Maybe my step is also to approve it, but I don't do the invoicing. So whoever does the invoicing would see, oh, there's some invoices that are ready to be approved. I'm sorry, approved and then ready to be paid. Gotta look at what I'm looking at. And then expense reports to invoice will be showing up here. Because certainly if I've approved somebody's expense report, they don't be wanting to wait, since 2016 or reimbursement. We don't want those things to happen to your team. If in this example, you know what? That was paid back in the old days. We didn't know to mark it. It was set as paid. It's already done. Cleared off. But certainly, and even today, if we pay it for it through our payroll, then we can just mark it as paid if that's the case. If we do want to pay it directly, we certainly create the vendor invoice that we want to take care of. And that will take care of that list. And then at the end of the day, we need to go ahead and to pay those waiting open expense reports that we've just approved. Certainly, we can take any and all of those. I'm going to pop it by invoice date, so I can just go to today's date and show you that I can take care of the payments that I need to take care of for this poor soul who's been waiting for her reimbursements and pay them out of the system directly. And that would be at any payments, by the way. If you're paying it as a check payment, it comes over as a default of cash, and it shows you my make believe balance, of course, what's remaining, payment date, generate the payment. Am I going to pay them by credit? Well, they need to be able to accept that card payment. So let's just do it through the cards or through cash and generate that payment. And there's done. And what else do I need to take care of? One other expense, vendor invoices. This one's always curious for me or good to show, because we showed you Kinko's may take payment with a credit card. I think if you do have that option, we think that if you want to pay those vendors by credit card, look for those first and either search for all or search for a specific kind of card that you want to use in case you pay them through different cards. And then any that will take that kind of card would be showing up here. And I can create and pay all of them at once, and I'd see my total pay. Or I can just say, you know what, I'm just going to pay Kinko's and all of Kinko's, and then I want to pay, one of these, and it would create me one payment for Kinko's, even though there's 3 different amounts here, and one payment for Garnet or Gannett, whatever that is. And I can pay that total. I'm doing it through the credit card. And what is the date of that payment, and generate the payment. If you're paying things through credit card, and you may have other ways like ACH. If we're going to just do a basic ACH payment, one other thing I noticed, we showed you how it could be a client that you need to set this up under vendors. We're certainly going to need it, that if you want to accept V card, you see there's ACH enabled. I want to search for those that are ACH enabled. And thank goodness I still had my Kinko's here ready to take care of. And if I want to pay this Kinko's through ACH, then it's similar payment. It's a cash account, but it's going to be through ACH and generate that payment. Now, if I'm not doing a batch, I certainly am generating the payment. If I don't click this, I can do one more search, create a basic payment, generate that payment, and then we'll talk about this in the next screen here. Okay, so one last thing. What do we have to print? Well, some of these we're not printing. Remember, we're going to either using the ACH, which ones are going to be an ACH payment. Maybe all we need to do is actually, sorry, clicked on that too soon. We don't have anything set up, but I did something through my bank account that I'm just going to mark it and post it as an ACH payment. I did it through AutoPay. I don't need to print a check. Anything that else might need payment, let's just do, there are no payments. Well, that's because of cash account I picked. Let's go to checking. There may be some of these that I did just as an ACH payment. Otherwise, I want to see use ACH, and it picked those that can use it for me, because I've also set up images and Kinko's now as that ACH. And in this case, I'm going to mark as ACH and post the payment, or do I need to also post and email vendors? This is a special setup, but certainly I can just take care of marking them as paid and closing it out, because it already has that set up and done. And there is more setup to be done. Otherwise, it's really just looking at the normal traditional, what do I need to pay? Select all or just one. I'm just going to select a couple and do that. Print checks. And it would be printed to a format that you may have to customize and make sure it fits before you do the final. At this point, we love it. And we're going to say post checks because I'm going to confirm it and we're done with it. Okay. And that'll take care of all those things that have been taken care of. And at the end of the day, this checks to print will be always, again, which way are you printing those payments that need to still be taken care of? Are there things that need to be posted or approved? That could be found more on accounting at this point. But I think otherwise we've covered most of everything other than our lovely last little thing on incoming charges. And I know we're like 14 after the hour. If you have questions, I'm going to be peeking up here. A project snapshot. Oh, thank you, Jim, or sorry, John. That will be something you need to send to us at support at Workamajig. You may need to do that system settings. Check for that first under your ... more on your project. If you don't see system settings, then that's where you definitely need to reach out to also your administrator in the system with Workamajig, your person in the house there in your office, saying, hey, I need to see or would like to see this. Can you make it available to me? But send that question to us at support at Workamajig, since it would be a troubleshoot. How do we get it to enable? I'll show you better. But lastly, thank you for that question. Send any other questions while I'm showing you all this the incoming charges. How did I get 280 some charges coming into my Amex? Now, make believe these are current. I'm not doing this currently, but I still have not cleared out these old charges. They're here for me to demonstrate to you for. Even my grocery bill is on here because this is my own testing of whatever I was buying on my card. Now, your charges would be company charges most likely and hopefully, and you have this set up to come in, and basically the idea here, instead of that one at a time entry of charges, you can go in and put and process the charge. What was the item? And I'm going to just quickly change something. I don't want overhead, but I'm going to grab something, whatever it was. Maybe it went to a project or not, and I'm going to go bear again just to keep it all there. Bear 02 or 03, what is the task, etc., and what is the vendor. Doesn't need vendor on this, but you can certainly put in the amount that was charged. And I'm having trouble finding my own screen. Department, office, posting date, charged by, sometimes it's just, oh, it came in with the number. My bad. The amount came in from the credit card, right? Who charged it? Well, it could be myself or whoever's approved on that card, right? And before I post it or process it, do I need to do anything else? Otherwise, the idea is that I've already popped what date it was, what project it went to, even though it was back in the history of beyond beginnings. You see everything can be showing across the top. And the basic idea is, do we want to mark it as processed? Mark it as cleared, meaning it already happened, by the way. I don't need to post it. I'm going to mark it as cleared. Are you sure? You can say, oh, no, go ahead and process it. If we hit process, that will put it on the project as a processed credit card charge. I was thinking about it because 2016 is kind of really silly when my project didn't start until 22. I'm going to resort it. I don't know if I have any 22 charges to worry about. Now, the other idea here is, do you want to mark it as cleared? Because they're old charges. We didn't even use it then. We'll just mark any and all as cleared, and it just removes it. Nothing hits your GL accounts when you're just looking at the download here. Not until we mark it, and I have to hit something, mark it as processed, will that charge hit. If it's overhead, if it's on a project, etc. And it does approve it and post it so that it's all ready to take care of, because it was a charge. Now we've got an option. Let me just see my latest charges here. I thought I did some little presets, but anyway, what I was going to show you is that certainly you can go ahead into the nice new changes is that, well, not new, but one of the things is maybe we've got the item in the system already. We manually entered it. We can link it to those unmatched charges and the whole list would show up here. You would keep up on top of it and find those that were entered in manually could be matched up directly. I can add an attachment to this thing. Or we talked about purchase orders. We can actually do an order. And I had an idea of who it was going to look for, and I thought I wrote it down, and now my brain is blank. But what order is in here that we may want to attach it to? A purchase order, for example. And if we have orders, this is a brand new option that if we want to edit the linked orders, and see I grabbed the wrong one, that's the step that you would be done. You need to have the order in the system and grab the right vendor. And I need to put the vendor in here first. That's what my problem is. Link the orders, and then here we go. And then I would find any orders that might be there. Now you can attach any number of orders to this charge, or one big order has a partial charge would be what we're doing here. Add selected and then save and whatever total amount, blah, blah, blah. And you can split. I'm not going to process that because I can't do it on the quick draw. When you have an error, notice the red. Don't ignore it. It'll tell you what you were trying to do. Are you going to split it? Are you going to need to do something? Or you just don't need it and I can't fix it? I can do this and come back to it, because it's just looking for you to fix it at that point. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your time. I rushed there at the end on the big processing of credit card charges. The thing is, are you connected to the connector? I'm not yet, so I'm not going to get any more downloads, but there is the system setup that will happily show you. It will automatically download nightly those charges, or you can import your own OFX, QFX type file, Q meaning quick book kind of file, or an imports a CSV, which takes a little more work, but OFX is a much easier way to import, and you'll see that you'll find that. Import, update it yourself manually. If you want more information, we will happily go back over that setup and the system setup that would need to be done. We have connected with Plaid credit cards, which is an outside agents group that is worldwide now, connecting with all kinds of banks and credit card companies so that you can connect up with your credit card charges. And anyone is a Cap One user, just in the recent month or two, we are actually able to use Cap One. Cap One is the last big bank that waited to connect to Plaid, but if you are wanting to use it, you'll see that it's a simple setup and we'll walk you through it. Well, it's an outside group that they're responsible. If there's troubleshooting, we work with them. But as you see, any one of your banks could be showing up here. Sometimes you have to search manually. Most of these are going to be your big banks. If you don't have it ready now, it may still come available. Otherwise, your outlook, your options would be your bank provides downloads, and if it can be given to you to do, I'm just going to go to this Amex one once again, you can do your own manual import right from the bank. So let us know how we can help you there. If you've stuck it out this long, you're an extra gold crown today. Thank you very much for your time. There's so much more to cover on those credit cards as far as if you really do want to do the connector. It is a nice, easy way for that purchasing agent to be able to see all those charges come in. Can they map it? Maybe not. The good news is by the settings you do in the employee record, and in that GL setup, it could be that it just goes back to Joe because Joe knows what he bought, and Joe would see his own incoming charge list and he would be able to go to his report, not anyone else's. Like I can see all of them, but he would just see his and he would map his charges that went to specific projects. Couldn't be a nicer way to keep up with all the ongoing expenses. Third-party payment process we have available too that I did mention, FastPay. We have a recording or webinar on that. If there are other questions, or I've gone so fast, you're now kind of forgetting some things we covered, you can send those to us at support@Workamajig. So you heard the webinar today on purchasing and you had this question. And we really appreciate your time. I'm going to go back to our help guide. I'm going to try. Here it is. And notice that if you don't remember how to find webinars, of course, here and any ones that you've already been to or have gone and passed, you'll see recordings to each of those and the upcomings. We don't have December uploaded yet. I hope that it'll be done any day now, because I know I've seen a list to alert me as to what ones I'll be doing next. So those will be posted. This will become a recording from today. So thank you once again for your time. Let us know how we can help you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.